All right. Well, hello and welcome, everyone. It's really wonderful to be back with you for this third and final installment of this particular series on synodality. My name is Russ Petrus, and along with Deborah Rose, I'm co-director of FutureChurch. We're really honored to have Dr. Kristin Colberg with us today. And Dr. Colberg does have a class to get to, so we're going to go ahead and get right into it. So I do apologize that we didn't do our usual introductions. Our guest, Dr. Colberg, is Associate Professor of Theology at St. John's School of Theology and Seminary in Minnesota. And she also has been appointed as a consultant for the Vatican Synod of Bishops. And so without much further ado, I will turn things over to Dr. Colberg. Thank you, Dr. Colberg.
Yes, it's such a joy for me to be with all of you. It's so fun to see so many people on the screen. It always gets me excited when people are interested in synodality. I jumped at the chance to be with you when I especially heard that you were looking at Raphael's book. I think Raphael's book is the #1 best source to learn about synodality. So it was really a easy yes for me. And I'm sorry that I can't be with you the whole time. I have to get to my day job in like half an hour. So a few things about synodality. What I want to talk about my experience, mostly of the fact that I've been in Rome most of this month. Some of you are aware, 20 of us have been writing the most recent document for the Synod. So that's what I'm going to spend most of my time on, the insider scoop about what has been going on most recently with the Synod. And during that time, Raphael was with me. So I want to speak a little bit about what you've read in his book and how that relates to like the lived reality of what's been going on. So just briefly, I live here in kind of rural central Minnesota, and sometimes people might ask, how did Kristin Colberg be appointed as I'm the only American who serves on the Theological Commission for the Synod? The answer to that is that several years ago, I really wanted to think about the relevance of the Catholic Church and how it could speak meaningfully and answers people's questions. And I noticed that my own questions and a lot of my students had to do with the role of the Pope. And especially the idea that if we want to have a vibrant notion of freedom and listening and individuality, how does that match up with this idea of a centralized authority in Rome, and particularly the idea of papal infallibility? So I wrote a book on the relationship between Vatican I and Vatican II, because I had always heard people kind of say either Vatican I or Vatican II, never how we could see those two councils together. So I wrote a book about how the Vatican I's teaching on papal infallibility can relate to kind of the more diverse and local and episcopal authority in Vatican II. So that book kind of caught the attention of people, because when we think about synodality and we think about becoming a listening church and we think about empowering everyone, it raises questions about what would the role of the Pope be in that kind of a church. And so because of my expertise in that area, I was appointed. So there are 25 theologians that support the Synod. Of those 25, 4 are women. And of those 25, only 3 people are not ordained or a member of a religious order, so a lay person. And I'm the only person from the US. So I take that position as a real honor, and it's got me to work very closely with other members of that commission, which include Raphael. So I spent about the first year of the Synod working on these theological questions. The questions were always not about the most high scholarly level of synodality, but the questions that I really focused on was, how can regular people, the people of God, understand what synodality is, what is the role of the lay people in a synodal church, of the bishop, and of the pope. So I spent my first year trying to help the synod communicate those kind of things on kind of a general level. But at our meeting about a year ago, I was approached by Cardinal Gretsch, who's the head of the synod. So this is what I have done in the last month. So as I think people know, for the first year of the synod, which just got extended last Sunday, breaking news in the synod, it's now 4 years instead of 3 years. Last Sunday, if you haven't heard, Pope Francis extended the synod by a year so that it will end in 2024. And we'll speak about that in a minute. So what happened during the first year of the synod, as you all educated people know, is that we had this diocesan stage of listening, okay? And in the United States, there are 196 dioceses. And in the world, there are about 2,400. Now, every diocese, as you know, in the world, got to hand in, or was mandated to hand in, 10 pages that said, this is what we heard during our listening sessions. Now, we all know from our experience that some dioceses were like on fire for the synod. My diocese had tons of listening sessions. It was a vibrant, exciting time. Where other dioceses, the most frequent question I got asked in the first year of the synod is, what can I do if my priest or my bishop is not doing anything about synodality? So we know that there was a spectrum of excitement and engagement. But every diocese had to hand in this 10-page report. As we know, Pope Francis mandated that every diocese had to have a coordinator. Well, that happened throughout the world, and it generated 112 national reports. So I don't know if you know this, it always shocks me. Every country, including the United States, got 10 pages, okay? So every diocese in the country handed in 10 pages, and the US condensed that report into 10 pages. And that was true of 112 of the 114 Episcopal conferences throughout the world. I will say, and I'm not familiar totally with how your group has engaged synodality, but my experience of the US Church sometimes is that it can be quite polarized. And I think there was some concern about what the US report would look like, and would it, be able to come together and write this report given the current state of our church. And I will tell you, my opinion is that the US report is really beautiful. I really think it's a thoughtful, prayerful, centered, honest, authentic document. So if you haven't had a chance, I think it's actually 16 pages, even though it was supposed to only be 10. It's 16, and it's beautiful. So I really recommend reading it. So what I have been doing is the synod appointed 3 people from each continent to meet in Italy to read those 112 reports and to put them into about a 15 to 20 page document, okay? So now I'm not trying to get too far into the weeds on this, but Mexico is meeting with the South American continent because of their language and cultural similarities. So when we say North America for the synod, we're just talking about Mexico and, Canada and the United States. So 3 people from North America were appointed, 3 people from South America, 3 people from Asia, 3 people from Africa. We just gathered for 12 days at a guest house in Frascati, Italy. We did not gather in Rome because the desire was that people weren't leaving and people weren't going to teach just one class or have one meeting. Like, it was really this 12 days of retreat in Frascati, where we prayerfully discerned what these reports said. Pope Francis was very clear with us that these are these texts are sacred texts that represent the voices of the people of God, and that we had to handle them very prayerfully. I don't personally, sometimes when I hear people criticize the synod, they try to say, oh, it's just a big survey process where we did a bunch of surveys. I mean, these are not surveys. These are prayerful, discerned reflections. The number one question when I meet with Pope Francis about the synod, Pope Francis always says, the synod is about this question. What is the Holy Spirit calling the church to in this time and in this place? And Pope Francis asked the world church to gather to talk about that question. I really can't underscore to you, no matter how closely and how long I work on the synod, how amazing that is to me. That Pope Francis doesn't say, well, you can't talk about this, or fill in this questionnaire with these like 4 options. Like, he's throwing the door wide open and he says, what is the Holy Spirit speaking to the church today in this time and place? I think that if you read these documents from Zimbabwe, from Brazil, from Australia, what really strikes me about them is how authentic they are. And I do think you really hear people's voices. One of the other most common questions I got asked about during the first year of the synod was, how do I know that the bishops aren't just going to filter out all the most important concerns? How do I know that we're not going to all talk about, things that might be considered controversial, like divorce or LGBTQ issues or clericalism, and that the bishops aren't just going to like wipe all that out and say what they think they're supposed to say? I think if you read these documents, it's pretty clear that that did not happen. I think these documents really voice the concerns of the people of God in a way that they sound like discerning documents. They haven't been picked apart. So I think the logical question that people will ask me is, well, what was in these reports and what was the most shocking thing about them, or what really stands out to you about them? And to be honest, like, my answer to that question is very easy, because there's one clear thing that stands out to me from reading all these documents, and that is, drum roll, what strikes me is how similar they are. Okay, I really expected when I entered into this process to feel like, oh, well, this continent or these countries, certain countries want this and other countries want the opposite. And how are we going to write a report that like really reflects, the world church when there's such divided views? And my experience of reading the documents is that what's really profound about them is how similar they are. And I think that gives me a sense of hope that the church can move forward together. So the most common comment that, again, this is my reading, and the document that we just wrote in Frascati will be out within like the next week, and you will be able to read it. It's going to be called the Document for the Continental Phase. So, okay, I'm going to tell you what the themes are in 1 minute, but let me just say that what's going to happen next in the synod is that in February and March, all of the continents have to meet and discuss this report that was just written in Frascati. So the report that I just wrote, with the group, is going to be the basis of these continental conversations. So what do these reports say? Again, you're going to be able to read it yourself by the end of the month. So in some ways, I'm not telling you any secrets. The number one thing that I read in these reports throughout the world is what Zimbabwe calls a thirst for more formation. Everyone in the church says what is needed is greater formation of the laity, so that they know their roles, so that they don't see themselves as one country put on the back benches. You know, the model of church where the laity is kind of these passive receivers, and the work of the church is really done by, you know, the clergy. So more formation for laity, more formation for priests. You know, this is kind of blending, but another really clear theme in the reports is that a real problem in the church is clericalism. And that doesn't mean that every priest is clerical, but there is a stream of authoritarian attitudes among priests that keep people from participating, that keep people away from the church. So formation for priests, you know, and again, in defense of priests, not every priest is clerical for sure. And priests are overwhelmed, you know, they have so many responsibilities and they're not trained well for all that they're called to do, and they need more formation. More formation for bishops. Like, how do bishops go from being a diocesan priest to running a diocese? Do they have adequate training for that? So the number one thing I saw was formation, a desire for greater formation that would lead to greater participation, that would lead to greater closeness. I mean, when you talk to Pope Francis about the synod, what he cares about is closeness. You know, how can priests be closer to their flocks? How can priests be closer to each other? How can priests be closer to the bishop? How can the whole people of God be closer to each other? The second theme I would say that was so clear to me was that of inclusion, a desire to be a more welcoming church. There's a beautiful, and so, you know, in my opinion, here I'll give you a representative quote. So, for example, the U.S. Church says, in the diocesan reports that we received, there is an urgent desire for more guidance on how to minister to people, the LGBTQ community, okay? Because many people in our church are divided between their love of the church and their love of their family members who, you know, are part of the community and or members of it. So a desire for to be more welcoming, a desire for greater formation, a desire for more inclusion of women in more roles in the church, inclusion of divorced people who have felt excluded. But obviously around the world, the inclusion question takes on different forms, such as in Africa, questions about people who are engaged in polygamous relationships and people who still practice certain elements of ancestral worship or indigenous religious practices, but consider themselves members of the Catholic Church as well. So how to be inclusive looks different in different places, but everyone is calling for inclusion. Okay, I'm going to bring up like one more, and then I want to leave some time for questions. Another thing that's in every report is a desire for better homilies. That, you know, it's amazing to me how something that I've thought and I've experienced, and I think maybe that's just a phenomenon that I know. I don't think multiple reports mentioned the need for more vibrant liturgies and more prepared, thoughtful homilies. Youth, that's another one. There's, you know, it's hard to read a report that doesn't lament what some countries call the ache of the loss of youth in our church. So the last thing I'll say is that, so what we did in Frascati for 12 days was write this report, which I really like how one person put it. It's not repeating, it's not just summarizing and repeating, and it's not problem solving. The purpose of this report is like to hear the voices. What did the people of God say? You know, our goal was that people would read this report and feel like we heard them, okay? So we offer up this report to the continental meetings to say, this is what the listening church heard in this diocesan phase of listening, and what are we going to do about it? So that's where we're at with the synod. Now, Pope Francis added a year. So the synod was supposed to culminate in October of 2023 with a meeting of bishops in Rome. Now what Pope Francis has said is that a meeting will occur in 2023 that will include bishops. But the hope is that it will also include other people, and there will also be a meeting in Rome in October of 2024. So he's adding the second meeting, partially because, you know, the style of synodality takes time. It's about listening. It's not about writing a document. It's not about editing a document. It's about learning the style of being church. And I think Pope Francis is 100% right that we're not ready to have that meeting in a year and then be done with this process of synodality. And given the nature of what the meeting will look like, 1 year is probably not enough. You know, one time. We need more. So I hope this is interesting to you and like what you were looking for. I know there's probably tons of questions, but I know you guys are meeting with Raphael in November, and he knows way more than me and is charming and smart and wonderful as can be. But I could take a couple questions if people have time.
Yes, thank you, Kristin. So wonderful. Yes, we are uber interested in what you're doing. So if you have like two people, I'm going to put your hand up with your little, sign, and I can take a question. Do you have a sense?
It's hard to come up with a question on the spot.
Yeah, no, it's. Do you have a sense of what will happen in 2003 that's different in 2004? Will there be two working documents? Do you have any idea of like the structure, or is it right now we just add another year and we're not really sure what that structure is?
I mean, what I've heard, and I don't know anything. I don't have secret insider. I don't know the inside scoop on this, right? Because I came home from Italy and the announcement had not yet been made. And so all I know is that what I've been told is that we're not talking about doing two different things in October, the 2 Octobers. It's not to add something different, but it's to do more of the. So it's not like one meeting is going to be composed of one group and one meeting is a different group, but it's to be more reflection by the same group. And again, a synodal style.
Okay, very good. Daryl, you have a question. Go ahead and unmute.
Hi, Daryl.
Hello. Thank you. That was excellent. Thanks for your work on this. The synodal process to me is excellent. My question is quick. So how did the actual results that you summarized square with what your expectations may have been in the beginning before you embarked on this?
That's such a good question, Daryl. I think that, again, like I said, the surprise to me is that it wasn't like competing. It was so similar. If you were like have a moment where you're up in the middle of the night and you don't know what to do, like Google like the Zimbabwe report. And, I did a session on it here in Minnesota, and I gave out like paragraphs of it to the people gathered, and they were like, we could have written this document. So I think that's amazing. And here's what my friend is recommending. If your diocese is paired with like a partner diocese, like in another continent, like often is the case, read the report of your partner diocese, and you will be surprised how people want the same thing. I will say quickly that I didn't think formation was going to be the #1 question. I thought women was a very big question. I thought that would be huge. It is huge. I thought that might be and it is big. But it was interesting to me how people, and maybe because it's a process that goes through stages, how this issue of formation was so clear. And some people would say, which I really touched my heart, like, we in the Catholic Church believe that parents are the first formers of their children, but parents don't know the faith well enough to form their children. So we need more formation in content and skills. Okay. Deb, you're mute.
One more, Frank, you have a question.
Sure. Hi, Frank. Frank is mute. Frank, you're
Oh.
mute.
You're muted, Frank. Oops.
I know, that happens to me all the time.
Okay.
Thanks. There you go, Frank.
All right, good. Kristin, you mentioned in talking about formation of the priest, in particular, clericalism. Did you find that clericalism had a lot of influence, emphasis, or was it just, just kind of stuck in there? Personally, I see a connection between clericalism, the role of the laity, and homilies. Because
Frank,
okay.
you're a smart man, because I see the same connection. My husband always says, sometimes one of the worst forms of clericalism is bad homilies. Clericalism was very pronounced. It was not a minor, it wasn't something you had to search to find. It was very prevalent in almost every document. People felt very passionate about it, and they say what you're saying, Frank, which is clericalism inhibits participation, because when there are authoritarian attitudes among priests, people don't want to come back to church, or when they feel like they've been scolded, or when they feel like their contribution hasn't been valued in the past. Like, for example, so clericalism takes on different forms. For example, if you look at the US report, after the introduction in the US report, the first thing they talk about is the sexual abuse crisis among clergy, and how that has made it hard to trust the sense that there's real listening, and that there is like a real ability, a closeness. So clericalism was talked about in a lot of different ways. But maybe one thing that will help people think about this is like, so now when Pope Francis wants to talk about women in the church, or clericalism, or inclusion, he doesn't have to look like this just came from him. He's going to be able to say, look at all these reports, So the people who are critical of him are going to be like, oh, that's just what you want, Pope Francis. He has like giving himself the greatest foundation to call for rethinking on some issues in the church, even though Pope Francis has spoke a lot about clericalism in the past. Okay, I could take one more question, and then some undergrads, they're not as eager to hear me speak as you guys are. I'd much rather keep talking to all of you, because these undergrads don't think I'm as engaging as I hope you do. But I could take one more question.
So Kristin, let me just tell you what was in the chat box, just because somebody did ask. Ellen Davis asked, what's your opinion of the criticisms of the low response?
Well, who asked this question? Karen?
No, Ellen Davis.
Ellen Davis is a smart woman. I got to be really honest with you. I find the like when I saw that the numbers were so low, it was really shocking to me, because I guess I live in a world where the Synod has been enthusiastically embraced. College kids love the Synod. I've seen so many people on fire for the Synod. So I was, to be honest, really surprised by it, and disheartened. At the same time, I guess I've really thought about this. The US has evidence that over 700,000 people in the United States participated in a listening session, either online or in person. That's 700,000 people that were consulted that shared their views. I mean, that's amazing. And I think it's like the seeds of future growth. Talk about the future church. But one of the things that I heard recently is there's like this whole world out there. Maybe some of you know it better than me, but it's called change management. It's like organizational behavior, and like companies use this idea of change management. We talk about it now in higher ed. But what it says is that whenever there's a big change happening, that there's this small group of like what they call the pioneers that are like willing to go out into like the wilderness and like scope it out, you know? Then there's like a larger group of like settlers who are willing to follow the pioneers, but they don't want to be the first people. And then at the back, there's a huge group of people that aren't going to change no matter what, because they're change just makes them too nervous. So I think the Synod is like, in some ways, it's like the people who are the top end of the people who are more open to change. You know, it was this pioneers of people who were willing to like engage in this process. And I guess my hope is that they will go out and be joyful witnesses that will catalyze other people, as Christianity has always been led by joyful witnesses, to get engaged. And that doesn't just mean the people that go to church on Sunday. It doesn't just mean, you know, for the Synod to work and for synodality to be a reality, it has to be transforming the whole church. And that means like going out and inviting people in or back, and not just on our terms, but like hearing what their terms are. You know, like, don't just come back to the place you left because we're asking you to come back again. But how can we transform ourselves to be more authentically church so that everyone sees their place and sees being included? So I'm really hoping that it's one of the reasons why I think the Synod got extended by a year, because I think this is the start of a process that actually, if you look at how people behave, it makes sense that it starts with a smaller group. Others are waiting to see how it goes. They're willing to get involved. They don't want to be the first ones. And some people just will never be able to handle that kind of a change. So you guys have been the highlight of my day. Now I'm going to go talk about Moses with my intro to Theo 19-year-olds. You know, it's a dangerous thing in life to make your money, eat your food and pay for your house off the ability to make 19-year-olds think the Bible is interesting, but that's what I do. So thanks for all that you guys do. It gives me such hope that people are out there reading Raphael's book. Thanks so much to your group.
Thank you, Kristin, and thank you so much for all the work you're doing. Blessings upon it.
Say hi to Raphael. I'm going to try. I just wrote it down, November 10th. I'm going to try to be there.
Great. Sounds good.
Yep. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All right. That was fantastic. We're going to turn things over now to Deb, who is going to offer a summary of this final section of Raphael's book.
Thanks, Russ. Let me get this up on the screen. Okay, thank you all again. Oh my gosh, that was so inspiring to me. All of our speakers have just filled me with hope and joy and inspiration with regards to what this process can be and what it means for our future. And, you know, every one of us on this call we've all been working for this change for so long, and to watch it unfold now in front of our eyes, it's just an amazing, amazing feat. So today we're going to look at part 3, synodality in the local churches. And before I even start, you know, Kristin talked about Pope Francis and his announcement that there was going to be a second, you know, an extension of the Synod into the 2024. And I just wanted, I don't know if any of you noticed this, but I sure did. When he made this announcement, he used language that Raphael Luciani uses in his book. And so it's really clear to me that Pope Francis is very influenced by Raphael's work, and or Raphael helped him write the announcement, which is also possible. So, but Pope Francis said about the extension, I hope this decision will favor the comprehension of synodality as a constitutive dimension of the church. Gosh, is that Raphael's language or not? And help everyone to live it as a journey of brothers and sisters who witness the joy of the gospel. So I just wanted to point that out before I started, because I got a big smile on my face when I read that. I thought, oh my gosh, we are reading the right book. So we know that Luciani recalls again and again in his book that a synodal church is a listening church. But a listening church means we go beyond personal conversation, and it actually shapes the way we relate to each other. He calls us ecclesial subjects, and priests, bishops, laity, religious. We're in relationship in a different way because of this deep listening that we do, and it actually reconfigures our church organization and structure and puts us in the presence of the Holy Spirit in this particular time and place. Not in the beginning of the church, not in the Middle Ages, but in 2022. This is what should lead us to discerning our mission now, this deep listening to what is actually going on in people's lives. And Raphael makes it really clear that this happens at the local level. And if you don't get anything else about the end of his book, is local church, local church, local church, because that is where it is. It happens at the local church. It's particular. And it is out of this historic and linguistic and cultural melange that this particular unique and holy flow of the Holy Spirit emerges. It is this particularity in a spirit of unity that Pope Francis wants to draw out and draw on as we live out this new phase of being church. And so once again, in chapter 9, Luciani wants us to remember, he doesn't keep repeating this stuff because he wants to just point fingers. He wants us to know why it's so hard to get there now. And I think most of us know this to some degree, but I think it's still good to remember what differences there were and there are now in terms of actually making synodality happen. And so he says, after Pope Paul VI, there was a progressive devaluation of local cultures as normative for reinterpreting tradition, theology, and faith. And there was a theological cultural homogenization of ecclesial forms. We all experience that. And this movement towards centralization in government and doctrinal development. For instance, Pastor Bonus granted greater power to papal primacy and relativized the Episcopal conferences. And of course, that was later overturned by Pope Francis with his Episcopalis Communio. But we start there in the 80s with that. And it also produced a curia who produced its own theology, limiting the teaching function of the bishops. And in chapter 9, he summarizes some of the documents that led us there, that defended this centralization, this papal primacy, this movement away from the Second Vatican Council. So anybody that wants to go in deeper can look at those documents themselves. But for Raphael, synodality is rooted in authentic Catholicity, and it moves in an entirely different direction. It's rooted in a very different way of being church. It's rooted and enriched by a multifaceted manifestation of particular churches in their cultures. He says, we need to affirm the variety of local churches with their own ecclesiastical disciplines, liturgical rites, theological heritage, and spiritual gifts and canonical forms. This is the evidence that Catholicity is in place in an undivided church. That shows how there can be unity among diversity. So he offers up a case study in the last chapter of the Latin American church. And he shows Pope Francis' apostolic exhortation, Quieta Amazonia, And he says it speaks clearly to the centrality of the local church. Everything the church has to offer must become incarnate in a distinctive way in each part of the world. Preaching must become incarnate. Spirituality must become incarnate. Ecclesial structures must become incarnate. And here, Pope Francis is getting us ready for what the people of the Amazon were asking themselves. They were asking for something new. They wanted to see a Catholic Church liturgy that fit their culture, ministries that fit their culture, language that fit their culture. And so Pope Francis is getting us ready to look for that, to accept that, to be a part of that, to say yes to it. As Luciani explains, when Vatican II began, the Latin American Church already had collegial structures in place. And this resulted in a very distinctive working relationship between local churches in Latin America and the Caribbean. The concept of collegiality that emerged at the Second Vatican Council was already being practiced by the Latin American bishops, and this served as a prophetic model for the wider church. Rather than the juridical European form of decision-making, which derived from episcopal ordination, the Latin American bishops were truly in a relationship with their people and thus represented their experience, faith, and needs. So in 1955, CELAM was formed, the Latin American Bishops' Council, and it was an essential way for them to proceed together. They learned how to work together as local churches. And in 1968, they convened what famously became known as Medellin Conference, which was inaugurated by Paul VI in Bogota. It was grounded in and foreshadowed the ecclesiology we are seeing Pope Francis resurrect today. One of the fruits of this newfound way of being church became one of the most important teachings in the church today, the preferential option for the poor. At that conference, lay people, vowed religious, cardinals and bishops gathered. They prayed, they consulted, they discerned, they celebrated the Eucharist. They offered each other the kiss of peace, and they were transformed. Participants opened their ears and hearts to the experience of people and learned about realities not well known in traditional ecclesial circles. So they had to learn what was happening in their people's lives. And then in 2007 at Aparecida, under the guidance of Jorge Bergoglio, the Latin American Church recovered the theological pastoral method to see, to judge, to act. We heard that him speak those words as a pope, and the importance of the ecclesial-based communities and the preferential option for the poor. So very important ideas of how to be church. And it urged the Catholic Church to discern the social and cultural context of the continent and the challenges of a new evangelization. Luciani goes on to emphasize how CELAM restructured in 2018, thus strengthening the principles of participation, co-responsibility, and subsidiarity. And he contends that the most novel features of CELAM restructure have been the decentralized manner in which decisions are discerned and made. And so for us, by understanding CELAM's constant innovation, we can understand with greater clarity Pope Francis's way of working in the church now as a pope. Under his papacy, the Synod of Bishops has been transformed and is continuing to transform. Under John Paul II, synods were more like rubber stamping operations. Only large group proceedings took place at those synods. Days and days of intervention were the fodder for boredom and sleeping, since every bishop knew that the end goal was predetermined by the Pope. But under Francis, small group discussions by language emerged like those of the Latin American conferences. And many bishops, especially European and North American bishops, resisted. I vividly recall the words of Sister Maureen Kelleher, who's on our left, who is an immigration attorney and who was chosen to be an auditor at the 2015 Synod on the Family. It was the first CELAM-like configuration of the synod where Pope Francis put people into small groups by languages. And Archbishop Charles Chaput of Philly wasn't having any of it. And he happened to be in Sister Maureen's small group. Whenever this small group discussed the working document, he called people like Kelleher bleeding hearts. So Kelleher referred to this cultural divide that she experienced at the synod. And she said the bishops literally, well, I'm saying this, these are my words. The bishops were like formed on another planet. But she said this, their loyalty was to their teachers, rigid doctrine, and other bishops, not the gospel. While she felt free to talk to many of the members in a friendly manner during coffee breaks, there were times I felt the condescension was so heavy, you could cut it with a knife. I was at that synod. I will never forget those words that she spoke. It was so painful to hear. In 2015, Kelleher saw a high level of non-acceptance of women as holding up half the sky. And she was referring to some bishops who had difficulty working with women. It's very clear that when I speak, I'm not sharing one iota of formation with the teachings that these men had received in seminary, Kelleher said. Some of it was like, oh, here comes the bleeding heart. Well, she's a woman. What else would you expect kind of thing? So she was a pioneer, but she suffered some, strong attitudes by some of the men who were present. And while women like Maureen Kelleher and Carmen Samu, who was head of the UISG at that time, the head of the worldwide leadership of Catholic women religious, their seats were made and progress was made by asserting their voices. And since that time in 2015, we have seen tremendous strides forward in this movement towards synodality. The Synod on Youth in 2018 created a fresh space for the voices of young adults in a brand new way in the church, and the need to make the church a more welcoming place for LGBTQ people, women, and much more. And the Amazon Synod was another authentic step toward authentic synodality, with consultations with the people living in the region that were wide and deep, and the fresh ideas about how to be church in the region. New liturgical forms, new ministerial forms that would include married priests and women deacons, and other important innovations that are coming to fruition even now. And last week, we learned Pope Francis had affirmed a new ecclesial body of discerners and decision makers in the region that includes lay, women, and men as makers with constitutive authority. And as Cardinal Pedro Barreto, president of the Ecclesial Conference of the Amazon Bishops, explained, this foreshadows a new way of being in the universal church. Episcopal conferences will have to transform to ecclesial conferences. That's really important. We're going to move away from bishops only conferences, which has been the complaint of many reformers, including FutureChurch, to an ecclesial model, which includes all the people of God. And out of these conferences, new Amazonian ministries, rites, liturgical expressions, and spirituality will find form. And we heard a lot about that in 2019 at the Amazon Synod, and especially toward the end, as the people of the Amazon talked about having their own rite within the Catholic Church that would reflect more closely their way of living and being in the world. So as we talked about, and the reason we had Professor Colberg here is that in this phase going forward, we just finished the local phase. She helped draft the document. The continental phase is where this document will come out and people will renew their examination of it, discern what is in the document, discern if it's the way forward. And then also the people of God are supposed to read it and discern. And then we'll have this continuation in 2023 and 2024 of the Synod itself and moving forward. And I'm sure in between 2023, although it's not been especially laid out yet, that there'll be more smaller movements within the church in terms of getting ready for the 2024 Synod. So as Cardinal McElroy say, during this period of time, don't go dormant. He says, stay engaged, do what we can. And Luciani, whose book I agree is so good in terms of helping us really see the vision. He finished his book as much as he began it by helping us to understand that the clerical institution is one of the great structural obstacles to discovering the gospel, and that synodality, as old as the early church and as new as Pope Francis' current vision, must replace the old order so that the gospel mission can be rightly discerned and carried out by the entire people of God in their own regions and cultures. So we have some small group discussions, which Russ had some questions for you to think about as we move into our small groups. And what we'll do then is you'll meet for a period of time in your small group, discuss these questions or whatever else comes up for you. It's been an exciting 3 weeks for me. So anything that you feel is important to talk about is what you should talk about. And then we'll bring you back and we'll finish it by doing a survey against time for you to think through a couple of questions so that we can move beyond this study into maybe what's next.
Well, thank you, everyone, for joining us for these 3 weeks. It's really been an honor to be with all of you and to share this exciting moment in our church, one that we've all been working for together, to share it together and see some things coming into fruition and to help continue to push that along together. The recording for this week's session will be available to you. We'll send that out in an email, but Dr. Colberg has asked us to not post it sort of relatively publicly, since it does share some things that was meant specifically for this group. So that won't be on the page that we ordinarily send you to, but it will be a video link that you'll be able to view. If you're interested in hearing directly from Raphael Luciani, we are hosting our 32nd annual FutureChurch Fall event, which is a major fundraiser for FutureChurch. But the theme this year is on synodality, and we think it will speak to a lot of what's going on in the church. So Raphael Luciani will be our keynote presenter on November 10th, and you'll have the opportunity to engage with him in some question and answer. And on November 3rd, the week before he presents, we'll welcome our 2 awardees. First is Sister Maureen Sullivan, who is being awarded the Louis Trivison Award for her work on educating Catholics about the Second Vatican Council, and of course, doing so much to help set up this moment in the church through that formation that she's done. And then our other awardee, who will be receiving the Christine Schenk Award for Young Catholic Leaders, is Junwen Trujillo. And she is being awarded for her ministry with and alongside LGBTQ Catholics in the church, among many other ministries that she's involved with. So we'll make sure that we put all this information in our email to you, and we'd love to see you there. Thank you again for joining us for these 3 weeks. We look forward to being with you again in the future. And to close out, I thought we would once again pray a non-traditional blessing by Ruth Fox. I think so many of you responded so well to it the last time, and I think it speaks to a lot of what we here in this group stand for. And so let us pray. May God bless us with discontent, with easy answers, half-truths, superficial relationships, so that we will live from deep within our hearts. May God bless us with anger at injustice, oppression, abuse, and exploitation of people, so that we will work for justice, equality, and peace. May God bless us with tears to shed for those who suffer from pain, rejection, starvation, and war, so that we will reach out our hands to comfort them and change their pain to joy. May God bless us with the foolishness to think we can make a difference in this world, so that we will do the things which others tell us cannot be done. If we have the courage to accept these blessings, then God will also bless us with happiness, because we will know that we have made life better for others. Inner peace, because we will have worked to secure an outer peace for others. Laughter, because our hearts will be light. Faithful friends, because they will recognize our worth as persons. These blessings are ours, not for the asking, but for the giving, from the one who wants to be our companion, our God, who lives and reigns forever and ever. Amen.